what are my chances of getting a job in Australia? I've been getting this question all the time in different forms. I'm a nurse, and how do I get a job in Australia? I'm an engineer, how do I get a job in Australia? And my response to this is your ability to get a professional job in Australia will come down to many factors. Some of the questions that you may want to ask yourself in order to guide whether you are prepared to get a job in Australia are: what are your work rights? Because if you have a valid visa to work in Australia, the process of finding a job is going to be much easier. Whereas if you're outside Australia, the main factor that you're going to have to take into account is your job application and most likely your networking skills. Yeah, so networking when you're outside Australia is very important. Contacting recruiters, employers, and trying to stand out is the best way to increase your chances. Also, if you work for an international company that has headquarters in Australia, you could potentially be transferred here, for example. There are many options in that regard, but again, the type of visa that you have, where you want to live in, the type of occupation you have, your skills, your work experience, your qualifications, these are all factors that are going to influence whether you get a job or not, or how long will it take you to find a job. Another thing that I usually ask people when they are asking me what are my chances of landing a job without having seen their application is: have you already tried applying for jobs in Australia? What have the results been? Have you tried networking with recruiters and employers? What have your results been as well? Are you familiar with the Australian job search process? Do you know what to write in your resume in order to make it stand out? Do you feel comfortable performing in job interviews? What have your results been if you have been called? Have you ever gotten a job offer? Or are you trying to change careers? So these are all questions that are going to guide you during your job search process and that you need to be very clear on. And another thing, of course, is where are you going to live? Are there any jobs available in that state? Will you like living in that state? Perhaps it doesn't really match the lifestyle that you're seeking. The best thing that you can do is to ask yourself these questions and then create a plan to guide your decision making from there and what you need to do. Basically prioritizing what you need to do first in order to maximize your chances of getting that job, whether you are in Australia or whether you are outside Australia. And another thing to consider is your skill level. If you don't have any work experience, or if you have only 2 years of work experience, it's not realistic to try to land a job as a manager, right? A managerial job, supervising a team of 15 people, or getting a very high salary that doesn't commensurate really with your skill level. So these are all things that you need to consider, because I've seen many people who are changing careers, for example, and suddenly they submit their job application and they don't get any replies back, right? And the salary that they're asking or the jobs that they're going for and the skill level of the job, they're not realistic, yeah? Or if you are a recent graduate and you're looking to apply for a managerial role, again, do you think that's realistic? So these are things, again, that you need to take into account when preparing your job application and try to create an action plan that focuses on improving your job search process. Another question is, I currently have a work and holiday visa. Should I travel to Melbourne to find a job, or should I keep looking for jobs online? Okay, so if you already have a visa that gives you valid work rights, that is, if you have a visa that allows you to work in Australia, I would suggest, I would recommend to come to Australia and try to find a job. If you already have the visa, just come, try to find a job, because employers usually prefer candidates to be already here. So if you put in an Australian address, it's much more likely that you're going to get a response, yeah? Now, if you've been applying for jobs outside Australia and you are not getting any results whatsoever, again, the reason could be not necessarily that you're outside Australia, but that your job application might not be as strong. So again, there are many factors to consider when it comes to applying for jobs. In today's video, we're going to talk about the Australian workplace culture and what it is like to work in Australia, especially if you're in a professional job. So if you're interested, keep watching. Australian workplaces tend to be very informal, and most organizations have a horizontal or flatter organizational structure. This means that people tend to work in teams and all employees are considered equal, and everyone's opinions are usually considered and heard. But of course, this depends on the company. There are companies that are very hierarchical, and that means that usually decision making is at the top, and then everyone else does whatever the boss wants. Typical work hours in Australia, especially in office-based jobs, are from 9 a.m. to
p.m., but there's a lot of flexibility in work hours, and depending on the employer, you can actually negotiate with them your different work arrangements, and you may start a bit late and then leave the office a bit later as well. Australian workplaces and Australian people in general are super relaxed and very, very laid back. Australians also tend to be super friendly and always laughing and smiling and making jokes. Something that caught my attention is that you call everyone by their first name or nicknames. And if you have a bit of a long name, for example, if your name is Susan, they're going to call you S. So they call you by your initials. And I know that this is something very common in English-speaking countries. And yeah, it's great. Australians are also very, very polite and very respectful. And that's something that I love about Australia. And the expectation is that everyone says, thank you, please, sorry, apologies, excuse me, no worries, my pleasure. And there's a lot of respect when you talk to people. Having said that, Australians can also be very direct in comparison to other cultures, and they really, really value honesty. So if you have a question or you didn't get something that your boss told you, just ask again. Say, hey, I didn't get that. Can you say that again, please? For them, when people ask questions, this means that they are engaged and interested and willing to learn. Another great thing that I love about working in Australia is that workplaces tend to be very multicultural. So it's likely that you'll have colleagues from all over the world, but also colleagues who are from your same country and who speak your same language. And this is great. But in the Australian workplace, it's generally not considered professional when you speak in a language that your colleagues can't understand. So if you're at work and you have someone who speaks your same language, try to stick to English only. This is out of respect for your colleagues who can't understand what you're saying. You may be making fun of them, but they don't have a clue. So speaking in language other than English is not super professional. And speaking of multicultural diversity, people from different cultures behave in different ways at the workplace. In the case of Australia, it's common practice to look people in the eye when you're talking to them. That is, make direct eye contact, both with females and males. When you greet someone for the first time, it's common practice to shake their hand and say, nice to meet you too. And when you say bye, you shake their hands or you just say bye from a distance. I come from a culture where when you meet someone new or someone you know or your boss or your colleague, you usually kiss them on the cheek. And this is not appropriate here in Australia. I have a friend who came to work here and on her first day, she kissed her boss on the cheek and her boss was taken aback. He was like, what are you doing? And poor my friend, she was just so used to greeting people in that way. And so heads up, that's not appropriate in Australia. Okay, now, what are the behaviors that you should avoid in the Australian workplace? Someone says something to you and you didn't get that or you didn't understand it. Instead of saying, what? Say, sorry, pardon, can you say that again, please? This is a bit more professional and more polite. Australians really love punctuality, so don't be late to work or meetings. This is something that's considered rude. And if you are late, let your manager or the person who you're having the meeting with know that you're going to be late. And yeah, just give them a heads up. Avoid swearing or making jokes or comments that may come across as racist or offensive in the workplace, because Australia has very strong anti-discrimination laws. For example, making comments about someone's appearance or treating them differently because of their gender, their ethnicity, background. This may come across as discrimination and you can get fired in Australia for this. So be mindful of that. Talking or debating about politics or religion is not common in Australia, so avoid these kind of topics. And as you may know, Australians are very well known all around the world for calling everyone mate in a very friendly way.
There you go, Mike.
But if you're in the workplace, this is not considered professional. Again, this depends on the industry. I have some friends who work in construction and saying mate to their colleagues is very, very common and that's fine. But just to be safe, avoid saying mate or using a lot of slang. As I said before, Australia is super multicultural, and that's one of the best things about working here. Because of this, you're going to get to meet a lot of people from all over the world and different cultures. And I think this is one of the best things because it's really, really going to open your mind. I'll give you an example. Before coming to Australia, I had never ever tried Indian food in my life. The truth is that I never really had access to it. It's not very common in my country. So when one of my colleagues from India heard this, she couldn't believe it. So the following day, she cooked and brought me a dal makhani, which is an amazing Indian dish. And since then, I've loved Indian food. It's one of my favorite foods in the world. If I hadn't been working here, I would have never been exposed to these kind of cultures. Yeah, I think that's one of the best things about Australian workplaces. And speaking of cultural diversity, Australian workplaces usually celebrate different cultural festivities such as Chinese New Year, Diwali, Ramadan. Yeah, that's amazing as well because it really opens your mind about all these different cultures and countries and history and traditions. So it's pretty valuable. Work drinks, it's also very common in Australia. This usually happens on Fridays or Thursdays, but it can be any day of the week. After a long day at work, you go to the pub with your colleagues and have a beer and snacks and just talk about life in general. And that's super, super common in Australia. Takeaway coffee is also pretty big in Australia, especially in Melbourne. The coffee culture in Melbourne is huge. And you'll see everyone in the morning walking around the city with their reusable cups, going to the cafe next door with their colleagues and having takeaway coffee or just sitting in the cafe and having meetings there as well. And going for lunch with your colleagues is also something super, super common in Australia, usually to celebrate birthdays or some work event. And work breaks usually go for 30 minutes or 1 hour. And of course, most workplaces in Australia have end-of-year parties, and I think this is very common in all countries. The end-of-year event is usually in December, and you go and dance and eat and drink with your colleagues and have a big party and celebrate the end of the year. Okay, if you want to know more about the Australian workplace culture, including salaries, work hours, how many weeks of holidays do we get per year, check out my next video here. I talk about everything that you need to know. And if you like this video and want to support the channel, please like and subscribe so I can keep making more content for you. I'll see you soon. Bye. Okay, the first thing that you should do is to know your work rights. That is, can you work full-time when you're here in Australia, or can you only work part-time? Can you work for the same employer indefinitely, or only for up to 6 months? How do you know your work rights? Check the conditions of your visa. For example, if you're an international student, it's likely that you'll be able to work only part-time. But if you're a permanent resident, you have full work rights. You can work for different employers, full-time, part-time, whatever you choose. So this is what we mean when we say know your work rights, because this is going to determine whether you can work here in Australia and the type of contract that you can get. Speaking of contracts, you really need to understand the difference between casual work, fixed-term contracts, and permanent contracts. In short, if you work as a casual, your work hours per week will be different according to your employer needs. This usually happens in the hospitality industry. For example, if you work as a casual at a restaurant or at a bar, you're probably going to be asked to come to work during busy periods or weekends. The good thing about casual work is that it's really, really flexible and it's amazing for international students. On the other hand, if you're hired on a fixed term contract, this means that you are expected to work for a specific period of time. Fixed term contracts usually go from 3 months, 6 months to 12 months. Sometimes there's possibility of extension, that is extending that contract, but that's what fixed term contracts mean. You are hired for a specific period of time, and fixed term contracts can be either full-time or part-time. And lastly, permanent work is ongoing employment. That is, you're hired as a permanent employee and you leave the company when you resign or when the company lets you go. If you want to learn more about your employment rights and your work entitlements here in Australia, I'll leave you the link below to the Fair Work website. You have all the information there. Okay, the second thing that you should know about is superannuation. You really need to get familiar with this concept. Superannuation basically means that when you start working here in Australia, a specific percentage of your salary will go into a super fund. What is a super fund? It's basically a company that manages and invests this part of your salary until you retire. And the idea is that you can't access that money before that. There are many super fund companies that you can choose from. The ATO, the Australian Taxation Office, for example, they provide a super comparison tool where you can compare the different super fund companies, their different performance and returns over the long term. I highly recommend using this tool and doing your research because it's going to really help you at the time of getting a job. However, sometimes some employers have their chosen super fund and you can go with that as well. It's up to you. Okay, but you might be asking, okay, that's cool, that's a great idea, but I'm not going to stay in Australia forever. I'm only on a temporary visa, or I'm a student, or I'm a backpacker. What happens with that money then? From what I understand, before leaving the country, you can actually withdraw your super money, but I leave you the link below to the Australian immigration website, which has all the information you need about the process, because there are specific requirements that you need to meet in order to be able to withdraw that money before you leave Australia. So check it out. Okay, the third thing that you should do when you are searching for a job in Australia is to know your industry. Research the industry that you want to work for, whether it is finance, marketing, or hospitality. You need to know how many years of experience and what skills do you need to get the job that you want. Are your skills in high demand? Are there any jobs in the city that you want to live in, or you may have to choose another city? Do you need any qualifications or certificates? What is the expected salary level for that job that you want to apply for? Because this is something that they're going to ask you in the interview. Another alternative for doing your research is to contact recruiters, especially if you're looking for a professional job. Recruiters can be of really, really good help. Okay, and this leads me to my fourth tip for finding a job here in Australia. Start using job search sites and start looking at different job ads. The major job search websites in Australia are Seek, Indeed, LinkedIn, Career One, Ethical Jobs. For more informal jobs, you can use Gumtree or Facebook groups, but beware of scams and always make sure that they are legitimate jobs. If you're a student, you might want to check with your university because usually different institutes or universities have a job search portal where they advertise internships, volunteering opportunities, or graduate jobs. So have a chat to your university, to your teacher or a career counselor, and check that out because those are really, really good tools as well. Bonus tip, volunteer. If you don't have absolutely any previous work experience or you don't have any work experience here in Australia, getting that job that you want will be a bit harder. So I would recommend doing what I did during my first years here in Australia, volunteering. Jump on Go Volunteer or Seek Volunteer or Volunteer in Australia. These are amazing websites to find volunteering jobs, even in professional environments. For example, if you're into marketing, you can volunteer one day of your week to help a not-for-profit organization manage their social media accounts, or you can do administration work. I highly recommend volunteering work because this will give you local references. That is, when you're applying for your next job, you're going to have recommendations from people here in Australia. It's going to allow you to know the Australian workplace culture. It's going to help you to practice your English. And at the end of the day, you're also helping a good cause. So it's a win-win. Okay, so now that you know where to look for a job, you need to understand job descriptions. Let's jump on the computer. As you can see, job descriptions in Australia usually start with information about the company and who they are. This is very important because companies want to make sure that you're applying for that job because you're truly motivated to work with them and not because you're desperate. They want to make sure that you're a good fit, and because of this, they're expecting that when you apply, you know what the company does and who they are. Okay, as you can see, then they'll go on to explaining the role and what your responsibilities will be. And then they talk about the key selection criteria. And this is a very important concept that you need to understand. The key selection criteria is basically the essential skills that you need to have in order to get that job. And if you really want that job, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have those skills and you meet those requirements. But how do you do that? You need to demonstrate that through your resume and your cover letter, and then of course in the interview. Okay, so this leads me to my other tip of things that you need to do to find a job here in Australia. You need to make sure that you have a good resume and a cover letter. If you don't have a resume or you have no idea what a cover letter is, I highly recommend getting started with that right now. Your resume is basically a document that lists your contact details, your work rights in Australia, your skills, your employment history, your education, your achievements, and interests. Whereas your cover letter is a letter that you write to the employer, telling them about who you are, the reasons why you're interested in the role and the company, and why you are the perfect candidate for this job. Don't put any personal information such as your marriage status, your age, your gender, or photo in your job application. I know that this is very common practice in some countries, but not in Australia, so please don't. Also, you should customize your resume and your cover letter to that specific role and company you're applying to. What does that mean? Don't use the same cover letter to apply for different jobs. You really need to make sure that it's tailored to that specific role. Okay, so once you apply for a job, you need to start preparing for your potential interview. If the company is interested, they're going to give you a call and they're going to ask you some questions. They're going to clarify some details, such as what's your expected salary, and they're going to organize an interview with you. If they're not interested, they will usually send you an email thanking you for participating and that they decided to go with someone else. That's fine. Don't be discouraged. It happens. It's happened to all of us, and that's okay. Just keep going.
Believe in yourself. Keep going forward.
But if you do get that call, you need to be prepared. I recommend keeping a list of all the companies you've applied to. Save those job ads, those position descriptions that you found, save them to your computer. So when they give you a call, at least you remember what company they're talking about. You don't want them calling you and then saying, sorry, what was that again? No. As I said before, they want to see that you are motivated to work for them and that you're really, really looking forward to getting this job with them. So you need to really show your passion, yeah? Also, setting the position descriptions or these job ads to your computer, it's going to help you as well to prepare for the interview because usually they have all the responsibilities and key selection criteria. Okay, and the last thing that you should do is paperwork, basic paperwork. That is, get your TFN, your tax file number. You should do this the moment you arrive in Australia. A TFN is a unique personal number that you get from the Australian Taxation Office. This is for tax and superannuation purposes. It's extremely confidential, so keep it safe. I'll leave you the link below to the Australian Taxation Office. They explain how to apply and everything you need to know about the TFN. You will also need to have an Australian bank account so your employer can pay your salary. Extremely important, and that's again something that you should do immediately when you arrive in Australia. Some jobs will ask you to have a working with children check. You will need a working with children check if you are applying for a job where you are working with children or people under 18 years old. This is basically a check of your criminal history. Some employers may also ask for a police check. This is again a check of your criminal history, and this is usually done if you have lived outside Australia within the last 10 years. And then other employers will ask you for a driver's license, and this depends on the job that you're applying to. Not usually for professional jobs, but it depends. So have this all documentation ready. And also your qualifications. You really need to have your qualifications ready as well. And this usually should be translated. Okay, so this is all for now. Please subscribe if you like the video. I have more content coming out, and happy job hunting. This video follows my other video on the Australian workplace culture, but today we'll be talking about not so much workplace behavior, but more about what it is like to work here in Australia in terms of work hours, salaries, what benefits do you usually get as an employee in Australia. So if you're interested, keep watching. Let's start with the basics. If you're working full-time here in Australia, the expected work hours are from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. But of course, this depends on the industry, because if you work at a bakery, you're probably going to be expected to be at the shop at around 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. But for general office jobs, 9 to 5 is the usual. And this is around 38 hours per week. If you work less than 38 hours, you're working part-time. Okay, what about breaks? Lunch breaks usually are between 30 minutes and 1 hour. This depends on your contract. And of course, if you need a break to go to the toilet or to have a coffee, that's totally fine as well. No one is going to micromanage you because of that. Now, I know that there are some countries where staying after work hours or working extra hours, it's seen as working hard, but not in Australia. Here, it's not really a big deal whether you stay after work or not. As long as you are delivering results and performing well, no one really will have a problem. Work flexibility. Australian employers have become much more flexible during recent years, especially during the pandemic. And you'll see that many companies offer flexible work hours for their employees. What does this mean? Well, if you are not a morning person, or if you have other responsibilities, such as having to pick up your kids from school, you can negotiate with your employer to have different work hours. So instead of getting in the office at 9 a.m., you may get in the office at 10 a.m. and leave at 6 instead of 5. This is something that's becoming more and more common in Australian workplaces. Remote working or working from home has also become very popular since the pandemic. And now if you get an office job here in Australia, it's very likely that you'll have to work in hybrid mode. This means a few days in the office and a few days at home. In Australia, both full-time and part-time employees have 4 weeks of annual leave per year. That is 4 weeks of holidays per year. Many people ask me, is taking holidays in Australia seen as bad, or are you considered a lazy person if you want to take holidays? Not in Australia. Here, people really value work-life balance and looking after your mental health, and that's why employers encourage you to take holidays. And sometimes you don't even have an option. I'll give you an example. Most office-based workplaces usually shut down for 2 weeks in December during the holidays period for employees to spend time with their family, to travel, and to take some days off. The only thing to consider is that if you're planning to take holidays, give enough notice to your boss so they can organize your work and be prepared. That's all. And apart from annual leave, if you're an employee here in Australia, you can access a different range of paid leave. For example, you can get up to 10 days of paid sick leave. If you just had a baby and you've been working with your employer for 12 months, you can take paid parental leave for up to 18 weeks. And there are so many other types of leave. So I'll leave you the link down below to the Fair Work site, where you have a list with all your different entitlements, work rights, and all the different types of leave that you can access when you are an employee here. And apart from flexible work and paid leave, you can access other employee benefits such as paid education. For example, if you're studying a course or a certificate that's relevant to your role, many employers are willing to pay for that education for professional development purposes. And that's something that I find that it's really good. You can also get discounts for public transport or gym memberships. You may also be able to access something that's called novated lease, which means that you can buy a car through your company and get tax benefits. And there's so many other benefits depending on the company that you work for, but these are the most common ones. Okay, another thing that you should know about Australia is that they have lots of public holidays, but not all of them are national. Many of these public holidays are different in each Australian state. For example, here in Melbourne, we have the Melbourne Cup, and on that day, we have a public holiday, but none of the other Australian states have this public holiday, and this is the case all across the country. Again, if you want to check all the different public holidays in each state, the Fair Work site has everything you need to know. A question that I often get asked is what's the minimum wage in Australia? But this is reviewed every year. And of course, there's a minimum wage for the specific industry you're in, and Fair Work has a lot of information about that if you're interested. Another question that people ask is, can you negotiate your salary when you get a job? Yes, of course you can. But this is as long as you are able to demonstrate that you can bring the necessary skills and experience to really add value to this job. And of course, never negotiate your salary before getting an employment offer. Once you get your offer, and if you're not happy with the salary, that's your time to negotiate. Salaries here in Australia are usually paid on a fortnightly basis or a monthly basis. It depends on the employer and the company. And of course, once your employer transfers your salary, you will get a payslip, which contains all the information that you need to know about your salary, hours worked, tax deductions for that specific period. And if you want to know a bit more about how much Australians pay on tax according to their salary level, I'll leave you the link down below to the Australian Tax Office website. They have a really nice table showing all the income brackets and tax payable, so check it out. Things you should know about working in Australia. As I said in one of my other videos, when you're working here, you have to be very mindful. If you make a comment about someone's appearance or you treat them differently based on their gender, ethnicity, or religion, or background in general, you can actually get fired. Australian workplaces are pretty big on compliance and workplace laws such as anti-discrimination and equal employment opportunity. These laws mean that everyone has the right to equal access to employment opportunities regardless of their gender, background, or ethnicity, and everyone has the right to feel safe in the workplace, both physically and psychologically. And this is why for psychological safety, most Australian employers offer free access to counselling services to their employees and their families. And another thing that you should know about working in Australia is that when you get a job, you usually have a 3 to 6 month probation period. And this means that if your employer considers that you didn't perform well in the job or you are not really suitable for that role, they may be able to terminate your contract. And speaking of performance, it's very common practice in Australia to have performance reviews. And these are usually chats or discussions that you have with your boss throughout the year to discuss your performance at work, your development goals, and how everything is going. If you are thinking of quitting your job, that is ending your contract, you usually need to give your employer enough notice. You need to let them know between 2 weeks or 4 weeks in advance that you're going to move on to another job, but always read your contract. Many people also ask me, do I need a degree to work in Australia? And my answer is not necessarily. Whether you need a degree or not will depend on your industry and the job that you're interested in. So, for example, the qualification requirements to work as a chef will be very different to those of an accountant. In some jobs, having many years of experience is more valued than a bachelor degree. So for this, I suggest doing a bit of research on your industry. And of course, you should also check seek.com.au, different job ads to see what are the different requirements. Another question that I always get asked is, do I need the IELTS to get a job? And my answer is usually not. I know that if you're an international student and you're applying for a graduate job or a big consulting firm, you might need to submit your IELTS test, but this is not always the case. Based on my experience, you don't really need the IELTS at all. Another question that I get asked is it hard to find a job in Australia? And I'll be honest, yeah, it's not easy, but it's not only for migrants, but also for Australians in general. I have friends who are Australians and they still have to submit lots of job applications and apply for many jobs. I think the secret to getting a job here is to spend a lot of time tailoring your job application, working on your resume, your cover letter, gaining experience and skills. If you don't have enough experience, go and volunteer, do internships, prepare for the interview. This is the best way to really get a job. So as long as you submit a good job application and you prepare well for the interview, you'll be fine. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps to support the channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye. thing that you're going to notice when you're working here is that your Australian colleagues use a lot of slang. Australians love to shorten words, and if English is not your first language, you'll have to get used to it. But if you don't understand what they're saying, just ask, they'll be happy to explain. And I'll give you some examples. If someone says, "I'm taking a sickie," this means that they're calling in sick for work, even if they are not sick. If someone says, "We have a meeting this arvo," this means that they have a meeting on that afternoon. Arvo means afternoon.
Found by tomorrow, Arvo.
If someone offers you a cuppa, this means a cup of tea.
Just come inside for a cuppa and then you can get back to it.
If someone says, "I'm having a sambo for lunch," this means that they're having a sandwich. If you help someone and they say ta, this means thank you. Footy is a big one. I'm going to the footy this weekend. Footy means Australian football or AFL. Australians love footy. If someone says, "Oh yeah, work is full on," this means that work is very intense, it's busy. If your boss says, "Hey, can you get this to me ASAP?" ASAP means as soon as possible.
ASAP. That means now.
You'll also see on emails the word FYI. This means for your information. For example, your boss forwards you an email and says FYI. This means that they just want you to read those emails for your knowledge, but they don't want you to action on them. It's just for your information. If someone sends you an invitation for an event and it says, "Please RSVP," this in French stands for "Répondez s'il vous plaît," and this means that they want you to respond to that invitation, whether it is for yes or no.
May we RSVP in the resoundingly negative?
If one of your colleagues comes to you and say, "Hey, can I ping you at 11?" This means that they'll send you a quick text or they'll give you a quick call at 11. If someone says, "Hey, I'm calling it a day," or "I'm clocking off now," this means that they are done for the day and they're leaving work now. Another one that you'll see is WFH, which means working from home. That's an easy one. And then another one is RDO, and this means rostered day off. An RDO is a day off, usually a day off per month, that many companies offer their employees as a benefit. Other idioms that you'll hear in the office are to pivot, and this word became very, very common during the pandemic. We need to pivot and create a new service. We need to pivot and create a new product. We need to be agile. And to pivot is to adapt to change quickly. Another one is white collar and blue collar. So if you have a white collar job, this means that you're working in a professional or office environment. And blue collar job refers to hands-on jobs, such as a construction job or a job in manufacturing. If someone tells you, "Hey, I need to touch base with you," this means that they want to make contact with you. They want to get in touch to discuss something. No worries. Well, you know this one probably. Don't worry, no problem. This is very, very Australian. No worries, mate. No worries. And cheers. You'll see in emails, usually internal emails with your colleagues. "Hey, can you bring me this paper, please? Cheers." Cheers is more an informal thank you. So yeah. I know that many of you are coming to Australia and you want to get a professional job here, or perhaps you're already here and you're trying to get a job. I think this video is going to be very helpful for you because we're going to talk about the main mistakes to avoid when writing your resume. So if you're interested, keep watching. The first mistake that many people make is that they are not tailoring the resume to the job that they are applying to. And this means that you have to customize your resume to the position description. That is, you need to use keywords, highlight relevant skills, as well as relevant work experience. This is very, very important. You need to customize your CV to make sure that it captures interest. And for this, you're going to follow the key selection criteria outlined on the job description. The second mistake when it comes to preparing the resume is that they use the wrong format. The main thing that you need to know is that many sites, even people, are selling resumes with lots of columns, graphics, tables, even very colorful resumes, but many of these resumes are not ATS proof. That is, they're not going to pass the filters of applicant tracking systems. So you have to make sure that your resume design and layout is simple. Another mistake that I always see people make, especially people who come from different countries, is that they include personal information in the resume. Personal information refers to your photo, nationality, ethnicity, your religious or political background, or your age, personal qualities that are not really relevant to the job that you are applying to. Here in Australia, employers, in theory, they assess applications objectively and based on merit, not based on where you're coming from, your background, or what you look like. That's why we don't include photos or very personal information. So please make sure that if you're including this information in your resume, to remove it. Another mistake is including no relevant work experience in the resume. So again, you need to read the key selection criteria, the job description, the essential skills required for the role, and make sure that you are aligning or including the work experience, your positions that are relevant to the job. And if they're not directly relevant, try to include those positions that highlight transferable skills, that is, skills that can be transferred from one experience to the other. This is very, very important, yeah? Another mistake that I often see people do is cram information on the resume. Avoid using paragraphs or big chunks of information describing your role. I highly recommend for your resume to read better is to use bullet points, listing your tasks or achievements using one sentence only. This is going to make sure that you're including all relevant information and that you're being concise and straight to the point. Another mistake that many people make is that they don't include a link to their LinkedIn profile or their portfolio of work. So if you have work that you need to show, for example, you're a web developer or a designer, I highly recommend having a professional website and including a link to it. Another mistake, and this is a big mistake, is not including your achievements. So we all tend to focus a bit too much on listing our responsibilities and tasks, but not our achievements. I highly recommend to highlight this because this is basically a reflection of how you can bring value to an organization. So it's very, very important to include evidence of achievements. And if you can, quantify your achievements as much as possible. Another big mistake is to include buzzwords or cliche words on your resume. This means please stop saying that you're a perfectionist or a hard worker or that you're an amazing team player. So if you're going to include those things, you need to include evidence. So if you say that you have a strong work ethic, please provide examples of why you think you are these things. To be honest, I highly recommend avoiding buzzwords and try to use the space that you have on your resume to talk about your achievements and to show how you can add value. Yeah. Another huge mistake is to lie or exaggerate. Please avoid doing this because when they do reference checks, it's very likely that these things are going to come up. Or perhaps if this doesn't come up, then when you start the job, they're going to realize that you don't have the skills that you were claiming to have. So it's very important to avoid lying or exaggerating. Another big mistake when writing your resume is not explaining employment gaps. So if you have an employment gap, that is a period where you weren't formally employed, I encourage you to include that, to include at least one sentence explaining what you were doing throughout that period. And if you can, highlight any transferable skills that you've gained throughout that period. This is very, very important. Another mistake that I often see migrants do is not including their international work experience on the resume because they think that it's not valid. Yeah, they think that they only need Australian work experience. Whilst it is true that having local work experience is going to give you a slight advantage when it comes to applying for a job, your international work experience is still valid. So please, if it's relevant to the job that you are applying to, include it. Yeah. Another mistake is including non-relevant hobbies or interests. So I highly recommend, especially if you're a graduate, to highlight any extracurricular activities that you've been involved in, but as long as they're relevant to the job that you are applying to, yeah? So if you've been involved in university clubs or societies, so perhaps you were part of a sports club, I highly recommend including all these details on your resume because they do speak to your personal qualities and your personality. But again, remember that they should be relevant to the job and the context of that organization. So if your hobbies align to the organization's values, I highly recommend including these extracurricular activities. Yeah. Another mistake is using Google Translate. Look, Google Translate is an amazing translation tool. It's an amazing tool to help you learn vocabulary and new words, but I suggest to avoid copying chunks of information and copying and pasting that into your resume. And this is mainly for the reason that when a recruiter or HR person is assessing your application, they can easily tell whether those paragraphs have been translated directly, because these translations tend to not be super accurate. So I recommend to use these translation tools for specific words, but avoid copying and pasting all chunks of information. Yeah. Another mistake that many people make is that they don't proofread their documents, and you need to make sure that these documents look professional. So it's very important to proofread them and have someone else read them as well and see if they make sense. And this is extremely important to check for grammar or spelling mistakes. You need to convey an image of professionalism, yeah? So proofreading is key. Another mistake is that the resume is just too long. Ideally, your resume will be between 1 and 2 pages, no more than that, unless you have a lot of work experience that's relevant and you're applying for positions that are of a very high level. For example, if you're applying as a construction project manager, perhaps the requirements of the role include having more than 10 years or even 20 years of experience. Then in that case, you can use 3 to 4 pages if you want. But if you're a graduate, or if you're just getting started, or perhaps you have 5 years of experience or 6 years of experience, try to condense that information into 2 pages maximum. And another mistake is to include references on your resume. That is contact details of your references on your resume. I suggest to remove any references. If you want, you can include one sentence saying references will be available upon request, but otherwise remove them. There's no need for that. In Australia, references are asked once the employer is almost ready to offer you a job. Yeah. So this usually happens after your job interview. If you performed well at the job interview, then they're going to ask you for references. And please make sure that you always give your references a heads up, letting them know that they're going to be called, that they're going to be contacted. So this is very important. Now, if you want to go deeper into this topic on more in-depth information on how to network here in Australia and how to prepare a strong job application step by step, I have a dedicated online course on how to land your first professional job in Australia. You can check all this information on the links below. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe so I can keep bringing all this content for you. And I'll see you next time. Bye.
Today we're going to be talking about jobs that you can do as an international student. Or even if you're not an international student, perhaps you're a backpacker or you're just someone who wants to get a job here. So let's get started. The first job that you could do as a student is to be an academic tutor, whether it is teaching science or mathematics, or perhaps you want to teach your language. I find that many international students or backpackers, for example, a backpacker comes from Italy, they can teach Italian as a second language here and work as freelance workers. There are so many websites where you can teach your language, so have a look around, and you can charge $20 the hour or even more depending on your skill level as a teacher. But this is an amazing way to have that little side hustle whilst you're studying. And in relation to this, you may want also to do freelance work. There are many websites such as Fiverr or Upwork where you can exchange your skills for money. Basically, you may want to teach a language, or perhaps you can provide video editing services. Fiverr or Upwork are good ways to get your name out there and your services out there. Another job that you can do whilst you're studying here in Australia or you're backpacking is to be a babysitter. So babysitters basically take care of children, usually when their parents are working or in other circumstances, whatever the case is, and you can get paid between $21 the hour or $30 the hour. Everything depends, but this is another way of making some money on the side. Another cool job that you can do is to be a support worker in the healthcare sector. The healthcare sector is growing a lot and they really need support workers helping and empowering people with disabilities or people who may need your assistance on a daily basis. So that's a really cool job, and these skills are in very high demand here in Australia. Another job that you can do is to be a student services officer or a student body. You just need need to go to your university because perhaps they have a job for you working in the student services area, and since you're a student, it might be a bit easier to get in. I highly recommend checking that out and see whether you can get a gig working in that kind of position. Another amazing job that you can do, especially to develop your customer service skills and your communication skills, is that of a receptionist or working at a call center. There are so many jobs available in administration, reception, and call centers. So I highly recommend checking that out. This is an amazing side hustle for when you're studying, and it's a good way as well of getting your foot in the door, gaining some local references for when you finish your studies, you can apply for that job that you want. And of course, receptionists and sales representatives are in very high demand as well. So yeah, have a look. Another job that you can do is that of a waiter or front of house staff or a barista, also kitchen hand as well. So basically hospitality jobs. These are amazing jobs as well to gain some customer service skills, perhaps some financial knowledge or management knowledge as well. I've seen many cases where people start working as waitresses or waiters and then they get promoted to managers, and that's a really cool way of getting professional work experience. For example, if you are studying cookery, commercial cookery, perhaps you want to start working as a kitchen hand and then move up as a sous chef, and that's another amazing way of gaining relevant experience for your CV and to grow professionally. And of course, in relation to the hospitality industry, you can also work as a retail assistant, working in a shopping center or selling clothes. That also will give you amazing customer service skills that you can transfer to future roles once you finish your studies. Another job that you can do is, for example, fitness instructor. Sometimes for these jobs, which could have an impact on the health of other people, you may need a qualification such as a Certificate 3, but in general, these are pretty cool ways and very flexible ways of getting started to work and getting professional experience and money whilst you are studying or whilst you are working here on a working holiday visa. Alright, so this is my list of all the jobs that you could do as an international student or backpacker when you're here in Australia. And another thing, please remember to volunteer. If you can't get your foot in the door in one of these jobs, perhaps you should start with volunteering. There are lots of volunteering jobs in professional environments out there here in Australia, so I highly recommend doing that so you can gain local references, and then that will allow you to move on and progress in your career. So that's what really helped me to get a professional job once I graduated, so I highly recommend doing that. It's a proven method. Always try to get those jobs that are going to get you problem-solving skills or customer service skills, sales and negotiation skills, those jobs that are going to allow you to develop your communication skills and your ability to interact with people. It's very, very important to do that. If you're a graduate, an international student or a backpacker, these are my recommendations, and I'll see you next time. I'm making this video because many of you have been asking me if it's really possible to get a job here in Australia, a professional job, without any work experience. So I thought that it'd be best to just make a video about it and clarify your concerns. Now, if you have more questions after this video, please leave a comment below and I'll try to answer it. Okay, let's get started. The main question, is it possible to get a professional job in Australia if you're a recent graduate or if you don't have local work experience? The answer is yes, it is possible, but it will be a bit more challenging. There are a number of things that you can do in order to maximize your chances of landing a professional job without a work experience. The first thing that you can do is that when preparing your job application, to highlight your education. This is especially if you're a recent graduate. Your education section should come before your work experience because this is going to be your most valuable asset. This is very, very important. Now, in your education section, I highly recommend highlighting any qualifications or certificates that you have and a description of your core subjects. And again, remember that you should include those subjects that are relevant to the job that you're applying to. You should also include your final grades, of course, as long as they are good grades, if they make you stand out and if they show evidence that you actually performed really well throughout your studies. I highly recommend including this. If you graduated with high distinction, please make sure that you include this as well. If you are in the process of writing your final thesis, or if you published any specific research, or if you participate in a specific research project or coursework project, or if one of your research essays got selected top of the class, make sure that you include all this information on the education section of your resume. Another tip is that you could include a link to your LinkedIn profile, and in your LinkedIn profile, if you don't have enough space on your resume to highlight those achievements, you can as well make sure that you include enough details about all these core subjects and projects that you've been involved in. Please make sure to highlight any involvement in extracurricular activities or university clubs or university societies, because this involvement usually reflects transferable skills such as leadership skills, communication skills, your ability to work in teams, etc. Now, in relation to this, the second thing that you can do when you have limited work experience, or if you're a recent graduate, is to highlight transferable skills. As you may have seen in all my videos, I keep talking about transferable skills, and these are basically skills that you developed in one experience and that you can transfer to a job or another experience. So for example, if you volunteered, or if you led a sports club, or if you participated in a university club or society, it's very likely that you gained very valuable skills. Or perhaps you worked in retail, or you served tables at a restaurant. Whatever the case is, it's very likely that you gained very valuable customer service skills. So again, I suggest to include all these experience and highlight the transferable skills that you gained. Try to make a link to the key selection criteria as stated on the job description. Yeah, that's very, very important. So highlight transferable skills. Now, if you don't have any experience whatsoever, my best advice is to volunteer or get any job, any entry-level job. In terms of volunteering, I recommend to volunteer in professional environments, and you can find all these opportunities in websites such as Go Volunteer, Seek Volunteer, or Volunteer in Australia. For example, you could volunteer helping a not-for-profit, managing their fundraising efforts, or managing their social media accounts, or perhaps doing administration for them. Again, I always say that when I was a student here, something that really helped me gain local references and local work experience is volunteering in the HR department of some of really big non-for-profits here in Australia, and that was an amazing experience, not only because I gained valuable skills, but also because and local references, but also because I was contributing to an amazing cause, and to the point where even after I got my paid job, I kept volunteering for most of these organizations. I also got to get more familiar with Australian workplace culture, which is something that really helped me once I got my professional job. It wasn't a shock. I was kind of used to in that environment. Another thing that you can do when you have very limited work experience is to do internships or placements. Especially if you're an international student here, it's very likely that your university, your institute, has the option of completing placements or internships as part of your studies, as part of your curriculum. So check that out, because that again is a very valuable experience where you're going to gain very relevant skills to your field of work and gain local references, and perhaps those opportunities may turn into permanent jobs. So highly recommend doing an internship as part of your studies if you have the opportunity to do so. Another thing that you can do to get your foot in the door is to network, and this could be network with your teachers, with people that you met in your volunteering experiences, perhaps with your classmates, or even with alumni. Most institutes and universities have alumni portals where you can connect with graduates from that university, and you can ask them for career advice, or you could also connect with prospective employers, or perhaps with recruiters as well through LinkedIn, and see if they have any available opportunities for you. That's another option, networking. Another thing that you can do to get your foot in the door and get more work experience is to start freelancing. So for example, if you think that you're really good at photography or perhaps developing websites, you could definitely offer your services in freelancing platforms such as Fiverr or Upwork, and these are amazing tools to start building your portfolio, gaining testimonials, client reviews, and basically building a network of new clients. So freelancing is another amazing way of gaining valuable work experience. Now, if suddenly you realize that perhaps you are lacking specific skills, perhaps you are an amazing photographer, but not at the level where someone would pay you for that, then my main recommendation, and this is something that I always recommend doing, is to invest in your education. So if you want to sharpen your photography skills or web developing skills or your Excel skills, whatever it is, I highly recommend enrolling in a course, in an online course. So invest in your education to gain new skills, because I'm sure that your skills could be very valuable for many people. Yeah, so it's all about investing in things that matter. Yeah, I'll see you next time.
if you want to work in Australia, this video is for you. Today we're going to talk about key mistakes you need to avoid in your job interview and things that you can do to improve your confidence. As you know, job interviews can be very intimidating, and I think I haven't met one single person that enjoys them. To be honest, they're pretty nerve-wracking because you feel that you're being judged, perhaps you don't know how to prepare. So hopefully this video will ease your nerves and give you all the tools you need to feel more confident and prepared. So let's get started. The first mistake that many people make when it comes to preparing for the job interviews is that they don't research their company. Job interviews are presentations. So if you have to give a presentation, obviously you're going to prepare. Well, the same applies for job interviews. Employers really appreciate when candidates take the time to research the company, understand what they do, their services, their values. And why is this important? Because this shows the employer that you've taken initiative and that you're proactive, because at the end of the day, identifying yourself with the values of the company basically equals or indicates the motivation that you're going to have to help the company achieve their organizational goals. Now, something that I want to know though is that researching the company is something that in reality you should be doing when you're first applying for the job. That is, you should be doing this when it comes to preparing your resume and your cover letter. So in summary, research is essential. Now, mistake number 2 is being unprepared and not practicing. When it comes to preparing for an interview, you do need to prepare all potential questions that the interview panel will ask you and use a structured approach to answer them. This will allow you to avoid going off on a tangent or derailing from the interview question or not answering straight to the point. And unfortunately, this is one of the biggest mistakes that we all make at some point or the other. We are asked a question and we start talking about things that don't relate to that specific question. We start talking about personal issues or things that don't have anything to do even with the job that we are applying to. And I want to say something as well that is completely obvious, but it is worth clarifying. No one is perfect. No one is born knowing how to perform at a job interview. We've all gone off on a tangent at some point or the other. I've made lots of mistakes in job interviews, especially when I was first starting looking for a job. There are some interviews that I look back and I cringe. I feel very, very embarrassed about them. So don't worry about it. I guess my best advice is to prepare. Now, mistake number 3 is downplaying your skills and achievements. Something that you need to understand is that in job interviews, your skills are your assets. So don't downplay them. And something that has served me really well in the past is that if I don't have much experience in relation to a specific skill required for the job, which by the way, these are called key selection criteria. So they require skills to perform that job and that you do need to address in the interview as well as in your job application. The best thing that you can do is to identify transferable skills. That is, skills that you've gained in previous jobs that could potentially be transferred to this specific role. And please remember that past experiences don't necessarily imply only paid jobs, but volunteering, internships, all these experiences count as situations where you had the opportunity to gain skills. So use them. Now, mistake number 4 is using cliches. And this goes for both your job interview, but also your job application, your resume and your cover letter. Saying that you're a perfectionist or a hard worker won't take you anywhere because employers are tired of hearing this. It's a huge cliche. So instead, I highly recommend trying to think about your past experiences and using real-life scenarios where you had to use the skills required to solve a specific problem, whether it is in the workplace, in your volunteering or internship experience, at your sports club, or at a restaurant. And we've all had some kind of challenge in the workplace. And again, this doesn't have to be a huge drama, a huge situation. It can be something as little as someone not putting the right information on an Excel spreadsheet and this having specific consequences. So how did you approach that situation? So if you don't have much experience, perhaps try to think about the little things and the small challenges that you've had. Everything makes for great storytelling. And in relation to this, something that I want to stress is that interviews are all about storytelling. And why is this? Because all stories, every story that you tell to your neighbor, to your friend about what happened to you in your everyday life, and now in this case, you're telling a story about a challenge that you had at the workplace, all these stories have a structure, a beginning, a middle, which is the conflict, and an end. The end is basically the result. So again, job interviews are all about telling stories, real stories. Another mistake that many people make is bad-mouthing previous colleagues, managers, or even customers. Remember that this is a job interview and that you need to remain professional. So what this all means, basically, you need to avoid talking negatively about your past experiences, about other people, and again, this includes customers, because the reality is that it can give a really, really bad impression. And as my mom always says, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything. There are studies that actually show that people who speak negatively about others, especially behind their back, are usually perceived more negatively and as less trustworthy people. And this applies to both real life and your professional life in the workplace. Okay, so what does this mean for your job interview? When you're telling a challenging story, when you're telling a story about a challenging situation that you had to overcome at work, remember to remain professional. Don't get personal. Just talk about the situation. What was the issue? What learnings did you take from that situation? What results did you achieve? What actions had you taken to resolve that situation? But again, avoid getting personal. Now, every time that I make one of these videos about working in Australia, how to prepare your job application, your job interview, many of you ask me for templates and guides and practical examples. So if you want a more step-by-step guide on how to prepare your whole application, how to practice for job interviews, together with guides, examples, feel free to check out our online career coaching program, How to Land a Professional Job in Australia. Link is below. Now, another mistake that many people make in job interviews is being too informal. And while you want to show your personality and connect with the interview panel, being too informal or overly chatty can be a bit off-putting, and you may come across as someone who's not super professional. So be careful with that. Now, having said that, something that I always remind people is that job interviews are, at the end of the day, conversations. Conversations that you're having with people who are just like you and who are trying to find someone that will make their lives easier. Yeah, that's all. And I do feel that remembering this will help you feel a bit less anxious about your job interview. Again, they are human beings and they're not there to judge you in a negative way, but they just want someone, again, who can help them with their everyday tasks, because probably they have a lot of work and they just need someone to help them. That's all. At the same time, though, you do need to remain professional because, again, you're going to be working in a professional manner. You need to be respectful, etc. So I guess use common sense. Now, mistake number 7, lying or exaggerating. Always be honest and tell the truth about your experience and your skills. I know that this is a no-brainer and something that sometimes I feel bad reminding people, but unfortunately there's a lot of people that do exaggerate or they do lie about their skills and experiences in the resumes, the job applications, even in job interviews. And the issue with this is not only that it shows lack of integrity, but also if you lie about your previous skills and experience, it's very likely that this will come up on your reference check. Or even if you get the job and then you don't have the required skills, you're not going to be able to perform. And it's very likely that you're not going to pass the 3-month probation period. So again, be realistic and apply for jobs that you are qualified, and avoid not telling the truth. Now, another mistake that I see many people make is not asking questions at the end of the interview. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the job interview process, basically at the beginning, you're going to be asked questions, and at the end, you're going to have the chance to ask questions to the interview panel. Basically, they're going to say, do you have any questions for us? And your answer always has to be yes. I do have lots of questions for you. Or maybe not lots of questions, but you do need to ask realistic questions and things that perhaps you need to clarify about the role, the structure, the team, or what are the challenges of that role, etc. So this is very, very important. When you ask questions, you're showing that you're interested in that role, that you've done your research as well. And not asking questions, on the other hand, basically shows lack of interest or that you're not prepared, or basically that you're just desperate for a job and you just don't care. Another benefit of asking questions at the end is that this is going to be your chance to assess the interview panel, to understand whether they are a good fit for you, whether the company is a good fit for yourself. It's happened to me, jobs that looked amazing on paper, but then at the end of the interview, I asked questions and their answers for me raised some red flags about the team, the culture, and I ended up rejecting that role. So asking questions is the opportunity to assess the interview panel. And again, sometimes remembering this will help you as well calm down your nerves, because you want them and they want you. Now, another mistake, and this ties back to doing your research before the interview, is not knowing your expected or preferred salary package and your availability. At the end of the interview, in many instances, and this usually happens when they like to, they're going to ask you what's your preferred salary package and what's your availability. Can you start now or do you have to give notice? So make sure that you are clear on this, that you do your industry research, your expected salary level at your skill level, and what's your availability. Do you have to give your employer notice, etc. Mistake number 10, arriving late. Being late for a job interview is a no-no and can actually be a huge turnoff for employers. So don't do it. Always make sure that you allocate enough time for your commuting, because things can happen. Perhaps there are train disruptions or tram disruptions. So always make sure that you arrive on time. This is again a matter of respect and professionalism. And another mistake that many people make is not dressing appropriately. So always make sure that you do your research about the company in order to understand their culture and how they dress, and if you can, of course, match your clothing to, again, the cultures. So if you have an interview at a marketing company that their culture is all about having fun, but you go dress as a banker, perhaps they're going to say, oh, this person is too formal. So you do need to do your research and dress appropriately. Remember that it's all about making good first impressions. So in summary, job interviews are all about storytelling, drawing on your past experiences, making good first impressions by being professional, showing the interview panel that you actually care and that you have an interest in the company by doing your research, and preparing. Preparation is key. And of course, if you want to prepare again, you can check out the online career coaching program. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe to keep supporting the channel so I can bring in more content for you. And I'll see you next time. If you're still deciding what to study, or perhaps you're a bit lost in your career and are considering to transition into a new job, here's a list of some of the highest paying jobs in Australia that don't require a university degree. So if you're interested, keep watching. First on our list is construction manager. This is one of the highest paying jobs in Australia that doesn't require a university degree. But what do people in these roles actually do? Now, the role of construction managers basically involves supervising and guiding workers on everything that relates to daily operations of a construction site. They're involved in all parts of the building site's activities, and they must have a deep knowledge of the building and construction industry. So if you're thinking about getting into the construction industry and you have strong project management and coordination skills, perhaps aiming at becoming a construction manager is not a bad idea. Now, according to SEEK reports, the typical salary for construction manager in Australia is around 195k per annum, but it can go up to 205,000 Australian dollars per year. Now, if this sounds good to you, there are a few things that you should know. Most construction managers, at least here in Australia, they start out their career as entry-level employees in the construction industry, and then they work their way up. To become a construction manager or to work in the construction industry here in Australia, another requirement is to have a white card, which you get through completing a certified general construction induction training at a registered Australian organization. And another important point is that while construction managers don't necessarily need to have a university degree, it's always good to have at least a combination of formal training with enough practical experience, including completing a diploma of building and construction management. Now, second on our list is underground miners. If you haven't heard, the mining industry here in Australia pays really well. So much so that many backpackers coming to Australia actually go and work in the mines to earn a bit more money in order to be able to save and then travel around. And the reason for this is mainly because working in the mines does have an element of risk, working in isolated and potentially dangerous work sites. Now, the main role of a miner basically consists of using machines and equipment to dig, load and move materials like ore, coal, rock and sand, either underground or in open pit mines. And miners often work in rural and remote areas and may travel to and from their work sites by flying in and out. So for example, if you decide to work in the mines in Western Australia, perhaps your work arrangements will consist of working in the mines for 2 weeks and then having 1 week off. So that's how it works in general. The typical salary for underground miners here in Australia is around 130,000 Australian dollars per year, but it can range from 120k per year to 140k per year, depending on your experience. Now, a few things that you should know. Similar to the construction manager occupation, underground miners don't need a higher university degree. However, data shows that at least 50% of underground undergrad minors do hold some kind of VET qualification, vocational education and training, that's relevant to mining and drilling or surface operations management. Other minors tend to follow the path of completing an apprenticeship or a traineeship and gain these qualifications while they're on the job. And if you're already working in the sector and you want to work your way up, for example, becoming a mine manager, you have the option to complete a diploma in mining management. Third on our list is auto electricians. So if you enjoy doing everything that relates to electronic wiring and electronic components in vehicles, this could be the job for you. Now, the job of an automotive electrician basically involves handling all tasks related to installing, repairing, and maintaining electronic parts and electrical wiring in cars. Now, the typical salary for an automotive electrician is around 140K per year according to Sync, but this can range from 130K to 150K per year, depending on your experience. Now, a few things that you need to know about becoming an auto electrician. As we said with the other occupations, while a university degree is not necessary to become a qualified auto electrician, you may need to complete a Certificate 3 in automotive electrical technology, as well as completing an electrical apprenticeship, which may go up to 4 years. So this occupation does need qualifications, but again, not a university degree. Now, when it comes to white-collar jobs, business development manager is fourth on our list. The work of a business development manager mainly entails being responsible for acquiring new customers or clients for a company or an organization. Basically, they focus on strategic planning, form new partnerships, and find new ways to reach new markets. Now, according to SIG data, business development managers in Australia typically earn around 105K per year, but this can go up to 115K per year, again, depending on your experience and perhaps depending on the industry that you're working in. Now, a few things that you may want to know about becoming a business development manager in Australia. Many people in these roles actually do hold university degrees, but again, this is not a requirement. For example, you can complete a VET qualification such as a diploma in business and combine that with relevant extensive experience, whether it is in sales, marketing, or even customer service roles. So basically, whilst a qualification in business may be advantageous at the time of applying for a job, if you have enough experience working in the industry and working your way up, then you can easily become a business development manager. It's not a mandatory requirement. Now, another white-collar job in this list is security managers. So what do people in this role do? Well, basically, they oversee all security operations in an organization. This includes managing security procedures and policies, supervising staff, and developing security strategies for surveillance, emergency systems, and occupational health and safety. And they can work in different industries and sectors. Now, the typical salary in Australia for security managers is around 115K per year. But again, this can range from 105K to 125K per year. Again, depending on experience, depending on your sector. Now, a few things to know about the security manager's role. Most security managers have a combination of VET qualifications, such as the Certificate 2 in Security Operations or a Certificate 4 in Security Management, with practical experience working their way up as security guards. If you want to become a security manager, you may also need to hold a security license, a working with children check, a driver's license, police checks, and even a first aid certificate. So again, this role doesn't require a university degree, but you do need to have some kind of qualification combined with experience. Another high-paying job in our list is recruitment manager. You probably heard about recruiters, especially if you're looking for jobs, and a recruitment manager is basically someone who strategically oversees the process of finding, attracting, evaluating, and hiring candidates for job openings within an organization. Now, the typical salary for recruitment managers in Australia ranges between 90K per year and 110 per year. Again, this role doesn't require a university degree, but most recruitment managers in Australia do hold some kind of qualification relevant to human resource management, for example, a Certificate 4 or a diploma in this discipline, combined with extensive experience managing the whole life cycle of the recruitment process. And having great customer service and negotiation skills are also key requirements of this role. Now, next on our list, it's a very interesting occupation, ethical hackers. And this may include occupations such as cybersecurity analyst or consultant or penetration tester. Now, if you're not aware, the job of a cybersecurity analyst basically entails implementing security measures to protect organizations organizations and their information systems from breaches. Whereas the job of a penetration tester, for example, is to simulate cyber attacks to identify weak points in the security of an organization's information systems. And I've actually met, not necessarily here in Australia, but I've met a few people overseas. For example, there's this guy, he's like 25 years old, and he learned how to become an ethical hacker by himself. He's self-taught, and he's earning lots and lots of money. So it's a very high-paying job that it's in high demand all over the world and doesn't necessarily require qualifications, and you can actually do it remotely. Now, here in Australia, the typical salary for ethical hackers ranges between 120k per year to 135k per year. In some instances, it could even be more. Now, having said that, some companies may prefer candidates who do have higher education qualifications, but this is not a compulsory requirement to get this type of job. As long as you have enough industry experience or you're able to demonstrate that you actually have skills in the area, combined perhaps with a VET qualification, for example, a diploma in cybersecurity or relevant professional certifications, you should definitely be employable. Again, ethical hackers is a very high demand occupation. Another surprising job in this list that doesn't require a university degree is digital marketing manager. Now, what do these people do? Well, the role of a digital marketing manager basically entails developing strategic marketing and advertising campaigns for a company's website and social media platforms. And digital marketing managers in Australia typically earn between 100k per year and 120k per annum. Now, again, a few things that you may want to know. You can definitely get a job as a digital marketing manager without a higher degree qualification, as long as you have enough years of relevant skills and experience in the field, such as SEO, email marketing, and social media strategies. Now, having said that, having a VET qualification, at least a diploma in marketing, or having a bachelor in business could be super advantageous at the time of applying for a job in this type of role. As you can see, whilst most of these occupations don't necessarily require a higher degree qualification, most of them still need a combination of relevant industry experience that you gain from starting in entry-level jobs and working your way up, and combining this with some kind of VET qualification. And this is something that I always recommend people when they're looking for jobs or when they are looking to transition into a new career, because educating yourself and gaining new skills and qualifications is always one of the best investments that you can make. It's a backup plan, it's a parachute if anything were to happen. So let me know what you think about these occupations. Is this something that you've considered, or perhaps you're already working in the industry or in one of these jobs? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe to keep supporting the channel so I can keep bringing more content for you. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.